everybody. Welcome to the Book Leads Impactful Books for Life and Leadership. I'm your series host and leadership performance coach, John Jaramillo. This podcast series is about getting to the books that have impacted the lives of the people on my network. So these are great leads to get to those books that have made the most impact on them, their work, their life, their business, their music, whatever it may be. I want to know which book has done the most for the person that I'm having that conversation with. And three categories of books that I cover in the series are: the first category, where they're sharing a book with me that I haven't read. Second category, where we're sharing or discussing a book that we've both read, whether specifically for the series or we read it before the series even launched. And then the final category is when I actually do have the author and or publisher of the book in the studio with me, if you will, to discuss the book, give it some backstory, give it some additional meat, put out a tone to share out there with the masses. And my guest today is Rick DellaRatta. And long known as one of the world's finest jazz pianists, Rick also began to receive major recognition as a composer when his symphonic piece, Permutata, was recorded by the London Symphony Orchestra at the Beatles' famed Abbey Rd studios in 1999. He was also recognized as a unique and important vocalist in 2004 when he was included in a definitive list of the greatest jazz singers of all time in Scott Yanow's book, Jazz Singers. Through his lifelong endeavor to help advance people to their highest potential through the understanding of jazz, as well as spreading peace worldwide through his Jazz for Peace World Tour, Rick is considered to be an innovator and a visionary, a designation that became known by many when he was included by the Foundation Center in their list of the top musician philanthropists of our time, along with Bono from U2, Elton John, Peter Gabriel, and Sting. And Rick, I'm so grateful to have you here, only because I love music. It's done so much for me. I appreciate it so much. It's in my everyday. So I had heard about your work, and I'm glad that we can sit down for this conversation.
Thank you, John. Likewise, it's great to just have a interview like this where we can just talk about the book itself. Rather than the book just being like, a short couple of minutes of an interview. So I'm excited to be with you today.
So, Rick, I read the bio, amazing, just that world recognition. And it's amazing that we've talked before. We talked a few weeks ago by video. It is amazing just how accommodating you are, how friendly you are. So and it's my mind playing tricks on me, but when I hear of somebody getting that kind of recognition, just the humility that you have in everyday conversations, even with me in the short time that we've known each other, I think it's incredible. I think it's reassuring for humanity and where we may be going in these tough times. So again, great bio. What does your work look like today? Who are you today? Can you walk me through kind of the day-to-day of your work and what you're putting out there nowadays?
Today is a very interesting time because people are acknowledging my cumulative efforts. And this kind of started, and the reason I'm starting to find out why it is because there seems to be a lag between, if an artist does something impactful, there's like a 25-year lag for the time he actually does that from when the public and the people and whatever it is, society catches up with it. And it kind of started as maybe a couple of years ago when someone said he wanted me to be on his podcast, and the podcast whole thing was new for me. And he said he had reviewed me very thoroughly, and he wanted to ask me a strange question. I said, well, what is it? He said, can we do 3 podcasts? I said, wow, that's amazing. What came to that conclusion? He said, well, I've researched you, and we have to do 1 podcast just on your music, 1 podcast on you, and 1 whole podcast on Jazz for Peace. So he had done all of his research, and that's when I knew, wow, something's going on here. There's some kind of energy going on in the world. And also the podcasting thing, there's something special going on in that genre as well. Maybe it was a relatively new genre at the time, or it was just starting to come into its own. And so all 3 things have manifested. I mean, podcasting is really come into its own more and more. As I see these different podcasters and see their outstanding work, I love the uniqueness of it. Even like with you, you have a special theme that deals with these books, and it was really a pleasure to go and see some of the different episodes that you had done, etc. And they all have their own. There's creativity involved because they all have their own kind of flavor, each podcast. So my work today, it's weird because we're getting closer and closer to kind of a 25th anniversary sort of a situation, and every day gets closer to a couple of things. One is the start of Jazz for Peace, and that was on the morning of 9/11. It started out with a poem that I wrote on the roof less than a quarter of a mile away, watching the events after I was tipped off by a photographer down on Wall Street that something crazy was going on in the World Trade Center, and I just went up on my roof. So that was 9/11, and as you know, we're getting ultra close to that. I mean, we're, I believe, less than a year away from the 25th anniversary of 9/11. And then, after only less than a year after that, well, a year and a few days after that, so September 25th of the following year, I was able to do a concert at the United Nations where I brought together musicians from around the world, and people were, inspired by the fact that musicians could get together from all different walks of life, from all different continents, but also that there was an Israeli, a Palestinian, and an American musician in that band, and people were like, "Wow, what's going on here?" And I said, I don't know nothing's going on with me because we've always been getting along. I've played with Israeli and Palestinian musicians together before, as well as Chinese and Japanese. We all seem to get along, and people thought that was so. Anyway, that started growing. So these things grow, and as we get closer to the 25 years, I started hearing things like, you should really do a book. Well, the podcast I told you about that was 3 podcasts long. It was about, the name of the podcast was American Authors and Others, and I wasn't even an author. And I looked at his thing, and it was very similar to yours, John, where I saw a lot of authors. And I said to him, wow, I said, look, I'm flattered. This is wonderful. It's fantastic. I think it's great. Let's do it. But I also said, I don't want to jinx anything, but I'm not even an author, right? Because like everybody else was, don't even. He said, you will be. He said, you will have a book. He just said it, And, you hear things from people that just say, somebody on the street or a friend or a musician, you should write a book, you should write a book. But now it's coming from a person who has a podcast devoted to authors telling me that, So
and he wants you across 3 of those episodes.
Yeah, he wants me on 3 episodes, and he's telling me that I will have a book. He's like, listen, take it from me. In other words, this is a much more knowledgeable sort of a tip when someone tells you, what I mean? There's a big difference between, Leonard Bernstein telling you you're going to go somewhere in classical music and, maybe, your cousin who happens to be visiting, something like that. So this was a guy telling me, and I'd also had someone say it will be a film who's won a lot of film awards. And that was, so I don't know if that'll happen, but I'm just saying, he's already been proven right, because what happened was with this book was I did start getting friends of mine saying, man, I see all that stuff, what you stuff. There's books out with nowhere near the acclaim and the credentials and the achievements that you have. Why don't you write about? And I'm like, I have to sit down and write a book. Oh my God, it just seems so overwhelming. Now, one of my friends then says to me, hey, there's this Chat GPT thing that can help with writing a book, and it can get information from the internet, blah, blah, blah. And then I noticed one of our volunteers messing around with one of those little things. I think it was called Genie, but I think there's different names they have. And you ask it things, and it gets stuff. And that happened to be a person who had written an article that had really had major legs. It was published on All About Jazz, and it was called Jazz for Peace, A Convenient Truth. And this was kind of back in the Inconvenient Truth days of Al Gore. And she just spun it, that's an inconvenient, but this is a convenient truth. Jazz for Peace is a convenient truth. And it got, the last time I looked, I don't know if they still have the numbers on there, but it was like 12,000 views. When most articles on All About Jazz, it's pretty good if you get a couple hundred views, or if you got 600-800 views, but yours was over 12,000. So I kind of floated the idea, and the next thing her interest was meeting our needs. Every now and then that happens. That's what you try to do with volunteers. See if you can capture a need with their interest.
Yeah. So then what are you up to these days then?
So these days, like I said, I'm watching the world catch up, you know? So I'm watching people that are fascinated. They want to hear the story. They want to know what's going on. They want to get involved. But I'm also now, here's the thing. I mean, once you've done some things that have turned out to look favorably on by people, you know, so people now, I mean, there was a lot of time when they, you know, we were hundreds of concerts into our benefit concert series. They never heard of it. They didn't know what it was. But now there's people who are like, wow, that poem you wrote, that was a good idea, what you did on 9/11. That poem, you know, that what the poem led to, a benefit concert series, that was a really good idea. That concert at the United Nations, wow, that could have saved the U.S. taxpayer $3 trillion if we had gotten together and built on that foundation, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So now people are looking at, like, what do you think? You know, I don't know if I want to wait 25 years to hear what you're thinking now. So now I do have people that are interested in, hey, we got some big problems here. What are some of your thoughts and stuff like that? So in other words, it's a little bit of a transition from being someone who was somewhat marginalized and in a very specific bag to someone who is now in a broadening sort of a situation. You know, I'm in it's like people want to know my thoughts about the world, about humanity, about where we're going as a species, all kinds of stuff. And because of that, I'm a guest on a lot of podcasts, hundreds of them, and I also have my own podcast, which is the Jazz for Peace podcast. Really, it's called The Final Solution is Love, presented by Jazz for Peace. So, in other words, I have what I had, but it's branched out to a lot of other things. And then some of the things that I'm known for, I no longer have to prove, you know, anymore. So I don't have to I've proven that the way forward is helping those who are helping others. So now it's like, well, what can we do about the fact that this is a way forward? How can we, you know, do it in a bigger and better way?
Yeah, and it's great that you're talking about how things come in like 20, I guess the way to refer to it is a 25-year cycle, where when it came out to when it really launches, when it really picks up, it's been 25 years. And it's great that
right.
In that first 25 years, now you do have that podcasting. Now you do have blogs online. So where in 2001 you had the internet, but you didn't have all this multimedia exposure that anybody could do from their home. So you have all these people that are curious now about your story, and you can work with different creators to get that messaging out there. So the amplification that comes from that, the technology we're all living through and podcasting, that medium is just incredible. And it's crazy because there's been tumult through the world since 9/11, but now at 25 years later, almost 25 years later, it's picking up again. So it's like the last time that it was really like this to this extent at its peak in the last 25 years ago. So it's timely that you're on all these mediums of podcasts, and there's the book, and you have your music, and you're touring while the world is going through this and is kind of navigating this dark time.
Well, you know, I get like people like spiritual people contact me, you know, people who are involved in raising human consciousness experts, you know, people that are what do you call them, astrologers, you know, people like that. And so there's people that are studying the energy of the planet and things like that. And so when you see a 25-year cycle, so in other words, it's beyond my scope, but there's a pull of energy towards those seminal events and the 25-year 25-year, you know what I mean, anniversary
Interval.
of them.
Yeah.
And so energy's moving without my knowledge, without, you know, just whether I like it or not. You know, nothing I can do about it. There's energy moving in this direction, and I'm just kind of like going with the flow, I would say, you know. Sometimes I just allow the day to play out, it can be quite fascinating what ends up happening.
Oh, I can imagine. Now, Rick, to understand how you ended up here doing this work, I always want to jump into my guest's childhood. So I like asking them to kind of lay out what their life looked like from, say, high school age, or when you're going into college, or when you're going into the workforce. What did it look like from then to now? Because I'm always curious, okay, the person I have in front of me, the work that they're doing, the world renown that they've gained, their affinity for all things peace, where did that come from? So what's your story, say, from high school age to now? I'm just curious about that journey that got you here.
Well, one thing that I'm noticing now from all of the studies and people I've talked to and experts that I've talked to in different fields is I was doing something that might have been different from, just everybody else. And that was I was raising my consciousness using the piano constantly, used from improvisation to exploration on the piano. I was raising my consciousness. I mean, a couple of days ago only, I did live where I performed for a human consciousness expert. And she talked about human emotions, that most of our human emotions are stuck at around 100. And from like 0 to 200 is where they really are stuck. And she calls that 3D. Then 4D is from 200 to 400. And then 5D starts at 400, okay? 5D human consciousness. And that's a high level. And if we get to that level, she's aligning with what all kinds of other people. In other words, there's a lot of people saying the same thing, but in different ways.
Yeah.
And basically, our human consciousness needs to rise for us to get out of problems, for us to find the way forward, for us to solve problems. So by raising human consciousness is a way to solve is a big thing if we can do it as a species,
Yeah.
But here I didn't know it. But I noticed that I would leave the piano and I would go somewhere to be with friends, and I noticed I was going, the level was going way down. But I needed to be with my friends. I needed to hang out. I needed to, But I noticed that, I was throwing myself up in a high level of human consciousness through music and through the piano as a young person. So I was experiencing something that I didn't understand when I was in high school, just to tell you what I was doing. And that's what kind of made me unable to agree with things that were of a lower consciousness that I think we need to question. Because here's what happened live on this podcast. It's coming out in July. You can see it live. I mean, you can watch it for your very eyes. I basically was like, okay, what's going to happen? You're a human conscious expert. We've gone over these numbers. I'm going to do something now, and you tell me what consciousness is at. She can say whatever she wants. But basically, I did this performance, and afterwards, she rated the human conscious level. Well, it was 540. 540. And she started at 20 with different levels of emotions going up. You know what I'm saying? And 600, I believe, is peace. 600 is peace. So in other words, I'm like, I'm rubbing up against world peace, basically, with what I'm doing. So it's a crazy thing. But so to tell you what I was doing stuff like that I'm only understanding now. So that's the difference between before and now. Before I was doing it, having no idea. I was like, I just knew there's something going on here, because my endorphins and my consciousness feels so raised. My intellect feels so stimulated. I don't know what it is. But now, as I learn from these other people, that's kind of what I was doing back in high school. That was
That's
little
incredible.
Different from, isn't that wild?
But it almost sounds
now.
like a spiritual flow.
Correct.
Just my word, but it almost sounds like this. Because shit, man, the other day I had the earbuds in. I was walking around my lawn, just edging the lawn, and I always need to have music. I don't like silence. In the bathroom, I got music on, and I'm singing, doing the lawn, everywhere. Wow. There always has to be music.
Wow.
And it went, obviously, you're going through your playlist, and it jumped from one to the next. And the jump from one song to the next, something happened. There was a song that I hadn't heard in maybe decades. I think the list ended and then it went into shuffle based on that list, right? The algorithms or whatever. And there was just such a nostalgia to the song that I felt my body light up. Like it felt like a tingling from just hearing this song. And it almost was like that peace. Like, I don't know how to put it. Like, I'm somebody who's always dealt with anxiety. But then when I hear certain songs, it's like, okay, now everything makes sense. I don't understand it. I don't know if it's because the nervous energy is me trying to seek some kind of peaceful energy. And then you just hear these right chords or chord progressions or tones or lyrics, whatever it may be, or the combination of them all. And it's like, finally, I'm achieving that peace that anxiety has existed trying to find. So when you talk about that scale of consciousness, it's like that, those notes hit and I'm like, oh my God, like it feels euphoric. There's no other way to put it. Like this particular song felt euphoric.
Well, you're bringing up, you're tapping into something very important, and that is like this woman who did that rating live on the air, because I just thought, let's just see what she says. She's a hypnotist. And she would tell me stories about people that would come, doctors that would call her. She'd get a call from a doctor, and the doctor would say, listen, this woman is coming into she's coming into my office she clears her throat all the time, like constantly clearing her throat, always. She's something wrong with her throat, something wrong, telling me there's something wrong with it. He says, I've examined this woman. I have examined I've done x-rays, I've done MRI, I've done this, I've done that, and there's nothing wrong with her throat. I'm sending her over to you, see if you can help her. And she would hypnotize this woman, and through the hypnotist, and she would, say things to her, and then she would wake her out of it, and she would say, I got some news for you. You've been hypnotized for the last 40 minutes and you didn't clear your throat once. So this is not a thing. Now, that's interesting. What that tells me is that we're being hypnotized. See, we're taking music and we're putting it into a capitalist society. Okay? And I'm not here to point blame on anybody because we've adapted this society. This is a society we've adapted. Fine. But that society is trying to sell products. They're trying to turn a profit. They're a profit-based society. It's capitalism. And they're hypnotizing you with their messages. You know what I mean? They're sending you messages because the same way she got this woman to not clear her throat all the time. And so now she has this woman on the things that she was hypnotized her with, listening to certain types of music, certain types of messages, certain types of positive energy, positive sounds. And now the woman's not clearing she doesn't have to clear her throat because it was a traumatic experience that started the throat clearing. You know what I mean? She had a traumatic experience and then she started clearing her throat, and she's been living that way ever since the traumatic experience. So the same thing's happening here. See, they're using music and that's fine because like you said, you walk around, we walk around a store, we hear music, it makes it more comfortable to shop. There's all kinds of uses, but we're using the uses that fit into our capitalist model.
Yeah.
You follow me? So
yeah. They
figured out how to teach us to, give us a certain type of music that'll make us drink more beer or buy more products or do this or do that. It goes, go for the scene of the movie. For pure entertainment purpose. So the sugary part of the music, you know what I mean? The sugar, the pop or whatever, fine, great, but music, you're extracting stuff. You know what I'm saying? If you go through, see, we have all these problems, but we're not using music to solve any of our other problems. And that's where the spiritual aspects of music come in, the artistic aspects, in other words, if you go to other societies, you'll see that their music, and I've been, to all different parts of Africa and India and Nepal, and I've seen the indigenous people, and I've seen how they embrace music. There's a documentary called Song of the Weeping Camel, done in the 1970s. I saw it when I was just slightly older than you were asking me about my life in high school, but I went to college early because I was asked by a college if I could play in their stage band when I was still in high school, and I said I'd love to, but I'm still in high school, and they worked something out with the school so that I could go to college my senior year so I could play in their stage band. and they transferred the credits back to my high school so I could graduate high school. So I graduated high school by going to college.
All right, so what? Okay, if you were at that point in high school, if you had that feeling where when I walk away from playing music, you were like, like this, right? When you're playing your music, you're here. All right, time to go see my friends, and something kind of dropped off. To get to that level of connection with the music, to get to that level of performance, to where a university or a college wants you to come play with their stage band. Now I got to jump back then. So when did you start playing music, if at all? Was piano your first instrument? What did that look like when you stepped into music for the first time?
Sure. Well, now just to complete that,
sure.
After that last year in high school, where I was my first year of college, then I went to an actual music school. And while I was in Boston going to music school, I just happened to go to the cool movie theater, where you would just go. They would have things that weren't advertised. They weren't like mainstream. And I just saw this thing that was at the cool movie theater. Like this is a place that has really interesting movies, And I saw something. I just went there, and it was Song of the Weeping Camel. I didn't know what it was. And it was a guy who was doing a documentary about people in Tibet, and they had a serious problem because of a camel that had given birth to an albino and wouldn't accept it. And they needed the camel to survive because they live amongst the animals, and they use these camels for travel or for whatever, all these different reasons. So they couldn't handle the camel dying, even though the mother didn't want the camel. So, and anyway, they tried everything. At the end of the day, I saw indigenous people in Tibet traveling 3 days on donkeys to get their hands on this musician, healer guy that lived down there, and bring him back up. And he made the camel weep with his music and take the baby back.
Come on, really?
Yeah, Song of the Weeping Camel. You can watch that for free on the internet. If you type it into the internet, you'll probably see that someone loaded it up just for people to watch for free. The camel weeps like uncontrollably on the screen. I mean, the guy's just capturing it. It's insane. But my point is, I was in, maybe this was like 2 years after I went to college, or whenever I was, one of my college years, where I just went there and just saw it, and I was like, whoa, they're using music has way more capacity than what we are doing, So that's why I feel like I'm I might be, who the hell knows what I might be able to do now that I've gone on a massive journey. But now let's go all the way back to where you were saying that was started. It really started with a piano.
Quick question, Rick.
Yes.
Quick question. Mm-hmm. If you hadn't seen that movie, would it have moved you? How close would you be to this path that you're on now? If you hadn't seen that movie at that youngish, impressionable age.
Right. I don't know if it would have stopped me or changed me from doing something, because it's something I remembered more as I started the benefit concert series, where I was helping outstanding causes, and then it came into play more. So, in other words, I kind of re-entered my life as I myself found myself doing things with music that indigenous people were doing. I became an indigenous person myself. Yeah.
It didn't shift your path. You went along your path, but you recall the impression that it left on you.
Yeah, because I remember the impression, but like I said, when I walked out of that movie theater, I was walking back into, my plan A, which is basically just to somehow fit into the world with my skills as a musician so that I could play music and pay the bills and, do something that I enjoyed and that, brought good vibes to others and, somehow pay the bills as well. Okay. So back to how you first came to music and whether the piano was your first instrument. What did that look like? Yeah, so basically it was Christmas Eve and a large thing was coming in the front door, something big. And the guy moving it in the back of it, the guy pushing it through the door was heavy set. And I wasn't supposed to be seeing any of it because I was supposed to be in bed, and my parents were already on to the fact that I would try to stay up and see Santa Claus, and they wanted me to, not do that. But I did want to do that. So we had a little, we had a little agreement to disagree, We agreed to disagree on that. I mean, I wanted to see Santa Claus, and they wanted me to go to sleep. And I was upstairs supposed to be asleep, but I was peeking around the banister trying to figure this out. If I could see Santa Claus, that was, without them catching me, that was what I really wanted. I wanted to see Santa Claus. I didn't want to make my parents mad.
I hear
and
you.
I thought that's got to be who the hell else? Who the hell else? Because bringing a giant thing in through the front door because it couldn't fit down the chimney in the middle of the night on Christmas Eve. Who could that be, right?
Yeah.
So that was enough for me. I was like, that's got to be him. I don't want to get in trouble, and I don't want anyone screaming and yelling at me in front of Santa Claus or whatever. So I'm just going to cut my losses here. Something's going on. That's obviously Santa. He's a big guy moving something big. I'll find out what that thing is tomorrow that they moved in.
But I saw him. I caught him.
I caught him. That was enough for me for this year, for that year anyway.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was way better than I had done in previous years. Let's put it that way. I mean, that was a score compared to the other times where I just, just like halt trying to keep, and then I would just fall asleep. I mean, I do everything to do to just keep my eyes open, and I fall asleep.
Oh yeah, yep.
So this time I did get some progress, and I'm like, okay, without anyone catching me, this was pretty good to see what I saw. Mm-hmm. So tomorrow I'll figure it out. So tomorrow came and I saw what that person had brought in, what Santa had brought in, and it was a piano. So I started messing around with it, and that's kind of what started it. And again, because I didn't want anyone to catch me, I started out improvising. So I was, right from the get-go, I was making my own sounds and listening and trying to figure out the piano all by myself. I don't know where I got that crazy idea. But I was like, I'm just going to figure this out on my own, whatever it is.
How old were you at this point?
Probably about 5 or 6.
So what was it? Was the piano for you? Was it for the family?
No,
or?
It was probably for my mother.
Okay.
But it was also could have been a situation where my father had been a musician, and then he was starting a law practice, and it could have been a barter situation where maybe he was representing a client, and the client had a piano store, something like that. It was like paying him. I'm just guessing here, but when you start out a bit, I mean, it's possible.
Were you pulled to music? I mean, obviously you said your mom played music, but were you pulled to it? Were you drawn to it? Or?
I was drawn to it. Just the fact that I would be, let's say, with my grandmother and my aunt, we'd be dancing around to music, and it might be the Beatles or something. But I was just like, who are those? Those guys are bringing us a lot of joy. Who are they, and what are they doing? And I wouldn't mind being one of them, I'm thinking. That's something I wouldn't mind being. I mean, there wasn't a lot of things that I ever wanted to be, but I was like, I definitely wouldn't mind being one of the guys that's bringing joy to people through music.
Well, I mean, that was such a movement at that time. That was a culture shock, right? I mean, there was nothing on TV before that to that degree, to that level.
You're talking specifically the Beatles?
The Beatles, like that, that movement of rock and roll really hitting the States, I guess. I mean, you lived it. I didn't. I'm just going by what I've heard and read.
Right. Elvis was a pretty big thing, but that was before my time. So I was born, when I was born, when I was really, really young, the Beatles were definitely, they were the talk of the town. Okay.
So then from there, I mean, you're playing around, you're improvising. Are you doing it more and more? What does that look like?
Just more and more. I mean, I was put into music lessons because I was basically spending a lot of time messing around with the piano trying to figure it out. And then when I was put into music lessons, I know that the teacher really thought I was talented, and she really took an interest in me, blah, blah, blah. And one thing did start leading to another with music. I mean, my homeroom teacher, I've talked more about this homeroom teacher. I don't know if this guy even is alive, if he knows he's being talked about on these podcasts. I have no idea. But I had a homeroom teacher, and his 2 kids played guitar and bass. Or maybe they both played guitar. I think one played guitar, one played bass. And he wanted me to play in their band for the school dances, So I got in that band. Then there was a bunch of grown-ups, and they wanted me to play in their band. And they promised my mother they would pick me up and take me back and make sure, I didn't get in trouble and blah, blah, blah. So I was able to kind of go into places where, normally a kid like me couldn't get in because he'd be carded or whatever, but they would
How old
make
were
an
you
exception.
at that point?
I was probably about 15 years old.
Okay.
Okay.
So what kind of
this was-
places? Like lounges, bars?
a lot of them were private parties, like private
Okay.
parties, weddings, things like. So there might be kids at the party if it was a private party. It could be a wedding, or it could be a club. It could be a club, but most of them were private kind of functions. And basically, the guy did pick me up and bring me home every time. So. It was a great experience. But like I said, I had those two bands. I had the high school that wanted me to play in their on stage band, they call it. And then my mother eventually wanted me to be the church organist. So once I took the church organist thing, I pretty much had to quit the paper route, and that was the last job that I had.
Wow.
Or only job, paper boy,
Okay.
outside of music.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, if you can speak to your high school experience, just maybe give a little more to that, a little more depth to that walking away from playing music to hang out with your friends. What did that conversation look like inside you? Like, what did that feel like?
Well,
Just
it
because
was just
for me, that's very peculiar in a good way. That a
Right.
kid that young can recognize that power that it has on him. And when he steps away, kind of the energy level kind of goes down. So can you speak a bit more to that?
Well, I would, there would be like, I guess, dinner, and then there'd be some time in between before I would go out, and I would be at the piano, and I would be like, improvising and maybe doing my lesson too. But I just noticed that there was, some kind of a consciousness raise. Something was lifting, an uplifting, some sort of experience between me and the piano. And I was like, damn, I don't know if I want to leave this, but, I don't want to be late to see my friends or all hanging out somewhere or whatever. And then I did notice that, it was a more sure thing what I was doing at the piano. Like that was a higher percentage play, because going out with friends was great as far as being with friends, but it may or may not work out. I mean, it might be boring, or there might be some excitement, but you might get in trouble.
You knew that was a lock. You knew anything piano was. You knew what you were going to get.
I kind of noticed that it was a higher percentage play than most other options, just because I could do something and extract something that was very positive about it. It would stimulate your thoughts. It would stimulate your intellect. The back and forth with the piano and thinking, was just, I don't know, there was a higher level of thought process going on, really. Thoughts would come into my head that I was like, wow, that's interesting that I just thought that. But it was, the combination of the music stimulating my intellect, and then my own thoughts would be a little bit more cogent or sharp.
Okay. All right, so you go to college, you're in Boston, you see the film. What happens after that?
Well, like I said, if it wasn't for Jazz Repeats, I probably would have forgot I saw the film. But, I saw the film. What happened in Boston that was really wild was something called the gig office. And it was an office in my school that people would call for musical. They needed musicians for this and that. And then, hey, if you call the gig office, you can have students and help the students a little bit with their tuition by hiring them. And they would post these gigs. And most of the students couldn't do the gigs, except I could, because I had functioned in society as a musician so much before I went to school. Now I'm in a school that's very, standardized. So you have your classical musicians that could only play classical. Then you have your jazz musicians that could maybe only play jazz. You know what I mean? And then you have a call for music that's not neither jazz nor classical, and they might not fit into either. So the musicians were more. And the way the school was set up was to matriculate you through a specific program. And I wanted to study everything, but I had to do it in a roundabout way because they didn't care if I got the knowledge. They just didn't want me to mess up their curriculum of matriculating people through, And they didn't want me causing everyone to question what's going on, which they probably should have been because I'm well-rounded. I was a very well-rounded musician, but not like, in other words, not in spite of the situation. You follow me? In other words, the opportunity was there if I figured it out, in spite of the standardization of the thing. So, but I was able to get that, and I was able to play all styles of music, so I was able to do these gigs. The people would come over to the school and meet with me, and I'd talk to them, and I'd say, "Oh, you want this here?" A lot of them were weddings. Okay, look, I'll play the organ. I'll play this on the organ on the church. How's that? Oh, I love that. Okay, and then once you have the cocktail, I'll play this little classical thing in the cocktail, Brahms or something. Oh, then I'll bring in the band. We'll play the Rolling Stones. We'll do this. Oh my, So I was like really making these clients happy, and leading these school bands, but that was way better than what was going on if you graduated. In other words, the scene out there was sucked compared to what I was getting. You see what I mean? I was having these wonderful experiences working directly with the client. Mm-hmm. So, but these other ones were like, I was getting paid. I would be paid as a sideman in a band, playing what the band leader wanted me to play, not what I wanted to play. I wasn't, the guy turning the audience on. I was just one of the people that was, like a trained monkey kind of thing. Then you'd get your check, 2 or 3 weeks later, and I didn't get a leader's fee. I got the sideman fee because the leader took all the money. The agency took the money. All that. I was involved in the corruption of the music industry out there, but I didn't know about it because, like I said, I was working directly with these people that would contact the school. So it was an incredible experience just working with all of them. And then as I was about to graduate, I did have kind of a mentor kind of a guy come up to me who was, again, he was a great jazz pianist, but he was also a great classical composer. His name was William Thomas McKinley. And he was like, "What are you doing? This is your last year here?" I said, "Yeah, I'm going to graduate." He says, "Well, what?" I said, "I don't know." He said, and he's like, "Let me see if I can work something out. Would you like to stay and get a master's in composition?" I said, "I'd like to, but I don't know if I can." He said, "Don't worry, I'm going to work it out so that you get scholarships and this, that. Let me see what I can do." And I had remembered that, out there was a different scene than what I had at the school as far as just freelancing and playing and being a band leader. So I took the opportunity to stay on these scholarships and get involved. That's where I got more involved as a composer.
Okay. And then after that?
Well, after that, I was making a living in Boston as a musician, so I just started living in Boston, making a living. Because if it ain't broke, I knew eventually I was probably going to have to go to New York after I graduated, but I wasn't in a hurry because the phone was ringing in Boston.
So it was just comparable to your school experience, where it was just kind of all different types of gigs, all different types of jobs that you were doing in music, all different types of events?
Well, by the time I did graduate from New England Conservatory, my name was around a lot, so I could get calls for a lot of wide variety of things, and sometimes there were well-known bands that were calling me. I had been an opening act and MC for Dizzy Gillespie. I was the pianist with the Artie Shaw Orchestra, that was a very well-known big band, and they were touring all around the country in a bus. And then I also got, I was the pianist with the Platters, and those were well-known names. Wow. But I was also playing with a lot of really great musicians that weren't well-known, but I was playing with them, and they were even better than the bands than the famous guys I'm talking about. So I had a good thing. I just knew that you're not supposed to kind of stay in Boston your whole life. I mean, eventually you kind of have to go through New York City. And I did get a call from a musician named Otis, who I played in a band with. We played colleges and stuff. His name wasn't even Otis. We just called him that because he sang like Otis Redding. He was a big, tall black guy. He looked and sang like Otis Redding.
It's a nice
and
gig.
So we called him Otis. And he called me. He's like, "Hey, what do you know? Why don't you come down here and visit me? You can stay with me. I got this loft with my roommate. You can just stay with us for a few days." So I come down to New York, and I got recognized on the street by someone who I'd gone to school with. And he's like, "Hey, what are you doing?" I said, "Oh, I'm just visiting, just checking it out." And I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "Well, we're looking for a keyboard player who has original music." You know, he almost like described me and said he was looking for me. You know what I mean? I said, "Well," I was like,
he's like, "Oh, there's
like,
Rick. I gotta organize my thoughts of what I'm looking for."
Kind of sounded like that, and I was like, "Well, it sounds like you're looking for me, but sorry, I don't live here." He said, "Well, listen, can you come to a session we're doing? We got this guy. He had some guy who was a drummer, but he was a drummer that had like a really good day job. I guess he was a techie type of drummer. So he had a job that made a lot of money, and he played the drums. So he was kind of bankrolling this music project they had. They had a rehearsal space, and they had a nice setup, and they had a keyboard in the rehearsal space. There's there, and so I just remember going in there and playing with them and showing them my music and all that. And I was just kind of like, this is fun. These guys want to play my music. Too bad I won't be able to play with them because I don't live here. But then they were like, "Well, how can we get you down here?" I said, "Look, I got a really good rent situation. I want to come down eventually." They said, "Well, if we find you a place." Oh, I said, "If you find me a place, I'll come down. Sure, if it's the same rent as what I'm paying." So they're like, "Well, what are you paying?" I said, I told them the number. And like, "If we find something," I said, "Yeah, if you find something, I'll come down. I have no problem with that. I just, I'm not prepared this second to, And they found something, but it was in Jersey City. And it was really twice as much as what they were saying. But so in other words, it was the amount that they told me, but I had to find a roommate. But anyway, I kind of knew I had to come down, and they had done that little, switcheroony, and so I came down on that situation, and then now I'm in Jersey City.
What year was that, Rick?
I think early 90s, maybe 91, 90, 91, 92, somewhere in there, because I think I graduated the conservatory in 89, so maybe I stayed another year or two in Boston, and
okay.
And then another guy who wanted me to play in his band had a rent control apartment on Central Park West in 105th Street. And he called me up, and got me out of Jersey City. So,
Okay. Yeah. I mean, rent control, Central Park, I mean.
It was crazy. Rent control had been abolished in like 1970 or something. I don't know, 1981. Rent control, for decades there had been no rent control. But if you had the apartment, you had it. And he had a rent-controlled apartment. Yeah, so I was living, I was right in the city now, staying with him. Like I said, one thing led to another. That Otis guy that I told you, he ended up giving me an apartment. He's the one who gave me the apartment in the Lower East Side where I watched 9/11 from the roof, less than a quarter of a mile away. That Otis guy gave me that. And another guy named Otis gave me an apartment in the same building as the one I was in, but a 2-bedroom because so I had a situation with 2 different Otises that was pretty phenomenal.
That's incredible. So all that time was just kind of finding these different partnerships, collaborations.
I was trying to do one thing, and I was ending up in something else, which I didn't regret. So you learn these lessons. One of the lessons I learned was, whatever you see out there, it's probably a mirage, because there's so many things are lying. Everything's a lie. Almost everything around us is not true. It's that. It all turns out to be a lie when you go and try to get it, It's just the craziest thing. But if you really play a good game of life and you try your best and you dedicate yourself, you could end up with something that not only you don't regret, but it might even be better than what you were trying to get. It won't be what you were trying for, at least if you're me. I can't seem to get exactly or even close to what I'm trying for, but I get something that I wouldn't trade.
Okay. So at that point, what do you think you were looking for that you couldn't quite reach, but you wouldn't trade what you did end up getting? What was your ideal goal, I guess?
I was looking for what you see now in these courtrooms every day with all this crazy stuff. I was one of those people, See, the music industry is extremely corrupt. And you hear about it now with this Diddy trial and all this crazy stuff that you hear about. Okay, well, that stuff is what was going on in the music industry. Now you see it in YouTube. You hear about these bands that hated each other. They couldn't stand each other, but they had to tour because they couldn't make money with the people liked their old hits and they didn't like their own. They only liked those songs. All this crazy stuff related to the music industry. And I was trying to be listen, all those people that are going in and out of this courtroom right down the street here, I think it's in New York. So right down the street from me, in and out of that courtroom are people that looked at something that was a mirage. You understand? They were trying to be this. They were trying to be something that they thought existed, okay, but didn't really exist because when they walked into it, was a very dark world,
Yep.
It was a very dark world. There was a lot of thievery going, a lot of theft, a lot of bad contracts, a lot of publishers stealing money, people not, all of that crazy stuff is what was really going on. But it looked like it was glamorous and fine, right? But you're finding out in these court documents it's not so glamorous. So, I was just looking at, look at let's take the Beatles. Wow, doesn't that look great? Good luck. Go look at the lives of all those people. They're not what you think. You know what I'm saying? They're not what you thought it was.
Oh, I just remember that 90s and early 2000s show on VH1, Behind the Music.
There you go.
You know what I mean? All the infighting, all the corruption,
all the craziness.
Billy Joel's manager stealing
$40 million.
You know what I mean?
That would be today? That's over $100 million in today's money. And that was stolen by his own brother-in-law.
Was it?
Yeah.
Damn.
His wife's brother stole all those millions of dollars.
Rick, can you speak to, because so many artists that put out great music had tough upbringings. And there is a lot that I speak to guests about the great work they're doing today being a product of a tough childhood, atypical childhood, traumatic childhood. Can you speak to, I don't know where, and I don't mean tying it into your life, but just that the creativity that comes out of challenges, that comes out of trauma in some cases. What do you make of that? Have you ever thought about that? What comes out of that for you? What do you think on that?
The journey itself is somewhat traumatic because the journey as an artist, first of all, ultimately it's a spiritual journey that you're on. So you're on a spiritual journey. Well, what happens when you're on a spiritual journey? One thing that happens is you outgrow things, okay? So in order to stay on to safety, you have to kind of stop yourself from growing so you can stay in that job. Because when you grow out of that job, how are you going to go do something that you grew out of? But wait a minute, that's where my money was, and no one's giving me money for what I've grown into. So you've got, it's a treacherous thing. You also have something called the Salieri effect. And I don't know if you ever heard of the movie called Amadeus.
Yes, never saw it, but I have heard of it.
Amadeus, there's a character called Salieri. Salieri was someone who was in
F. Murray Abraham was in that.
F. Murray Abraham played Salieri.
Oh, look at me. No, I never saw it. Okay.
I hate to tell you, John, what's crazy, I have 6 degrees of separation with almost everybody on this planet.
Oh, I can imagine.
Crazy thing. So let me tell you mine with F. Murray Abraham, just so you know, you mentioned a name, you throw a name out, and I have 6 degrees of separation. My concert at the United Nations was a situation where I had written the poem, Jazz for Peace, I had recited the poem, and now I was trying to do things with the living up to the words of the poem Jazz for Peace. So I'm trying to live up to those words, and I'm trying to do some things, maybe play a few concerts for some outstanding causes. What can I do? I'm trying to figure out what to do. And I tell my manager, one thing, if you wouldn't mind, if you could just call over to the United Nations, and she's looking at me like, what are you, crazy? And I'm like, could just call over there and just tell them who I am, and tell them tell them I want to bring a multicultural group together, people from different, show the camaraderie of music and blah blah. Just in your spare time, So a year later, she tells me she's going over some things, and she's like, okay, now you got this gig in Paris, and you're going to play with those two guys from New York. One guy that was driving a cab in New York, and then he went to Paris. He was a big star. Another one was fixing a horn, and then he's a big star in Paris now. This is what, because this is what happens in New York. You could be like, you're nobody, and then you're a big star in some other place. But anyway, you're going to play with those guys. Then you're going to go with the drummer to Italy, and you're going to meet an Italian bass player, and you guys are going to make that happen with the Italian bass player. Then you're going to go to Luxembourg, was it Luxembourg? And you're going to play, in this, and someone's going to pick you up and drive you to Croatia. And oh, by the way, that United Nations, they want to do that. So I said, okay.
Yeah.
She has no idea the significance of it, So I said, okay. Thanks for lumping that all together, but can you tell me a little bit more about the United Nations? So, well, they have a sponsor. The sponsor is the such and such. We have it on a page, jazzforpeace.org/UN. We'll have this information, which I can't remember the name of that sponsor. The mission to the something, the United States mission to the blah blah blah. But they said you need another sponsor. You need another sponsor, and this is how. If you get this other sponsor, it's going to happen. So I had written a song called Joshua's Song for a man who had written a book about what it would be like if Christ were alive today. And he called the book Joshua. And this book took off like crazy. It went kind of viral before we even knew what viral was. And it was eventually picked up. He self-published it, but it was eventually picked up by Macmillan Publishing. And the Macmillan Publishing put it all around the world in all different languages. And he actually invited me once to New York because Macmillan was throwing a party for him, and I went to the party and stuff. And it had outsold every other book in their catalog except for Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. He hadn't sold as many as that one. But the other ones he had outsold. So I had written Joshua's Song, and that thing became a movie starring F. Richard Abraham, or whoever that guy is. What was the guy's name?
F. Murray Abraham.
F. Murray Abraham starred in the movie about the book that I wrote the song called Joshua's Song. Now, because I wrote that song, they became the other sponsor for the United Nations concert.
That's incredible.
Because they had been singing that song around the country with a choir. They had put the melody to a choir, and the choir was singing Joshua's Song around the country. And they had been saying to me, is there anything we could do for you? Well, I don't know what you guys could do. I mean, there probably is, but I don't know what. Well, I was able to call in that favor then. And so just to tie in with F. Murray Abraham, that's my 6 degrees of separation. And you can literally say anybody, and I have somehow...
Oh, I believe you. I believe you.
It's bizarre. It shocks me. Go ahead.
That's why. It's just incredible that somebody that's lived a worldly life as you have and career and contributed so much. It's just, I don't know. I don't know what the impression is that I had of you before we spoke, but then you're so down to earth. You're so open. So it speaks to just your work ethic, your life ethic. I brought up F. Murray Abraham because you had brought up Amadeus in response to my question about trauma into creativity. So can you continue that thought?
Let's do that. Yes. So I'm so glad you got me back on that, because F. Murray Abraham played a spectacularly important role in Amadeus. And if you watch that movie, and I hope you will now watch it afterwards, you will see a man who recognizes every minutia of talent in Mozart and does nothing but try to destroy him. Nothing but try. So in other words, he has manifested all of that knowledge at a slower energy, at a 3D energy. And this is the whole thing, that we've got to get out of 3D into 4D and into 5D. and I don't know how long I'll be saying this because part of the reason I'm saying this because it was my most recent podcast interview, so I'm still in my mind. But I hate to say it, all these other people and even me, I always feel the same way. In fact, the woman who had no idea what she got me into with the United Nations, she had no idea the significance of that. She had written about Jazz for Peace when I first started Jazz for Peace. She just made a little blurb, and in the little blurb on the United Nations flyer, it's a little flyer. If you go to Jazz for Peace jazzforpeace.org/UN, just the letter U, letter N, you'll get to this page. You'll see the flyer, and she wrote this, that I'm trying to raise the consciousness of people. She just came out of her.
She wrote it just...
She wrote on her own. I never even showed it to me. I saw it on the flyer. She just put that on there. So at the same time, she had no idea that bringing Israelis and Palestinians and Americans together would be so significant today, 25 years later. She did know that I was that's what I was doing, even though I might not have known it. So raising consciousness is a big thing. And anyway, at this lower level, it's treacherous to advance in the arts. And Mozart is a perfect example, who I wrote about in the book, in the foreword to the book. And now, if you read the foreword to this book, it's only like 3 pages in where the foreword always is. Yeah, it's like the foreword. I mean, literally, 2 pages in and there's the foreword. And this foreword is a perspective of Mozart by an artist. So you'll never really see a perspective like this. You'll never see one. I've never seen one. That's why I had to do it. But the point is, if you read this book, you'll see what Mozart was up against. And that is very similar to what an artist is up against in the arts, just not exactly. In other words, it's theme and variation. It's different, but it's the same. It's the same adversity, Now, what I wrote about was Mozart in contrast to just a regular kid given a musical instrument by his father at the same time on the same day. So this foreword says, the first words of my book are, it is the year 1761. So the first thing I do is I take you to 1761. Mm-hmm. And that's what I was doing at the piano as a kid when I was playing Bach and Mozart, and then I was improvising. So I was improvising in my era, in my time, but I was channeling these musicians into their time through their music. Yeah. And in this, and I'm just going to try to find, for example, you think you're going to read all this incredible stuff about Mozart, this and that, but you don't. You read how the child in the middle of nowhere advances because his relation to his instrument is more pure than Mozart's father, with a stick, making him study exact tutelage things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So in other words, the kid has a more honest and peaceful relationship. So you see the kid advancing while Mozart is being held back, and then finally Mozart advances. He advances after he becomes rich because the father teaches him how to be, basically, because his father knows how to do this. His father was someone who, had a lot of, he worked. He was in the service of the archbishop, and he had all of this knowledge. And his father created this, almost like the guy who created Mike Tyson. I don't know, that story of Mike Tyson?
Yeah.
Up in the... Yeah, this guy turned him into a monster. I forgot his name, but I'm talking about the old man.
Yes, I do. Kind of like took him under his wing and
turned him into a monster killing machine. You know what I mean? In the ring.
Yeah.
Well, Mozart's father turned Mozart into this amazing trained monkey, which was great for business. Because he was a child prodigy. But through this combination of extraordinary musical training, along with his own personal exploration and advancement, Mozart has now artistically outgrown anything that the superficial world could offer him. So now I'm taking you, this is, I'm in page 2 of the foreword, but Mozart now is growing out. In this paragraph, he's growing out of his high-paying gig as a child prodigy. You follow me?
Yep.
So watch what happens now when he grows out of his high-paying gig, right? He has artistically outgrown anything that the superficial world could offer him. He is now exploring the true heights of his artistic potential by giving birth to music that stimulates the intellect along with the ability to advance mankind for centuries to come. I mean, I can't read it without, it almost makes me tear up just to read it. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Now listen, and this is why it's good for someone to read this from another musician, because I know what this guy's about. He gets thrown out of his position of servitude in Salzburg and is soundly rejected and disinherited by his father. So, you know what I mean? He goes from, because his father, you see what I'm saying? Like, this is a situation, he's out of favor, Utterly abandoned by society and heartbroken beyond belief, he then composes over 600 musical works, including 21 stage and opera works, 15 masses, and over 50 symphonies, until he dies at age 35, buried in a pine box without even the money for his own immediate family to be able to pay for his funeral. So, talk about adversity, right? So, yet, unlike others who may have received a similar fate for their sacrifices, his music lives on. And he receives performances today that he qualified for back in 1775. So in other words, you hear him today, but he didn't get those gigs during his lifetime. You see what I mean? When he wrote that music. Now he's getting it. He's not here.
It's like what you said about, your work getting recognition 25 years after it came out, but obviously on a more distant plane, hundreds of years now. But yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, and and I said in places like Vienna, which have turned into somewhat of a Graceland of guilt, because you go to Graceland, you literally, Vienna is almost like Graceland sometimes with these giant Mozart things. But unfortunately, Mozart was not embraced by Vienna at all during his lifetime. So my point is, it's a higher level of human consciousness would address this problem as well. And it would give people a chance to hear great artists during their lifetime, because you listen to them after they're dead, I'm sorry, it's a derivative, because you're in another time. So music's going to be great and all that, but I can't tell you what might have upset the king if I listen to Mozart now, because I wasn't around in the 1700s to, to be there and know. So,
because that music was created in an energy, in a community, in an atmosphere. So if I'm understanding your point correctly, it's like, I wonder if I heard that music in that time, what would have resonated with me as opposed to hearing it centuries later.
Correct. And we say we get so much from this music even in the centuries after. Imagine what we would have gotten if we could have embraced it during the artist's lifetime. And you know what? It's across the board. If you go to MoMA, Museum of Modern Art, up the street here, you'll see a bunch of paintings, right, that may be worth millions of dollars for all I know. But what about when they were alive, Vincent van Gogh didn't. I was on someone else's podcast, and he wanted to do an episode about Vincent van Gogh. This was in Zion. It was live in Zion Canyon in Utah. It was an amazing opportunity for me to be, looking at the beautiful. But it was about Vincent van Gogh. He didn't sell a painting his whole life. So he thought he sold one, but then he found out his brother had bought it and put it in the basement. Made him think he sold it.
Yeah, I guess, that's part of... I'm trying to think about how that reconciles to legacy. You know what I mean? Because when I think of legacy, it's something we're intentionally trying to create now, something that stays while we go, while we pass on. But did those people think about it that way? Did those artists think about that way, how I'll be remembered, or were they just kind of in the moment, how will they receive me now? So it calls to mind for me what legacy may look like, and maybe a new appreciation we have for long-lasting legacy after we're gone?
I mean, a lot of people will say to me, hey, what you've created is a great legacy and blah, blah, blah. And I hope it will outlive me. That would be great. Fine with me. But I mean, I'm not going to be around. I mean, I don't know how I will benefit, if I'm not even here, when they finally want to say, hey, we're going to pay this guy what he was worth or something. I mean, the problem right now with our world is very simple. We are funding anything but peace at 100%. And if you want to use the word war, you can, because war is funded at 100%, and peace is funded at 0. Yeah. So, I mean, you could do a lot just by funding world peace at 100% and war at 0.
Yeah. Rick, can you walk me through it, almost in wrapping up this area of getting to where you are now? Can you walk me through that day of 9/11, you writing the poem that led to the piece? Can you kind of give me some insight into your day that day?
Well, basically, if you look at it, there's a CD called Jazz for Peace, and if you ever just probably find that on Amazon. If you ever do look at the cover of that CD, you'll see a picture of me that was taken only a few hours before 9/11. The picture was taken on September 10th, and there was a photographer who was taking pictures of me on the 10th, and she was taking pictures of me for her private catalog, and she was giving me the negatives. So she was keeping the negatives, whatever. It was one of those trade-offs where you get free photos, So I was basically, just doing that with her that day, taking photos, and you'll see one of them if you look at the cover of that. And the next morning, I get a call early in the morning. The phone's ringing, and usually people don't call me those days early in the morning, because 9 to 5 for me in those days was 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. So, I was on a musician's 9 to 5. So I get a phone call very early, and I answer it, and I said, hey, what's up? And she says, I'm so sorry, I don't know what to do. I know we spent the day together, blah, blah, blah. I said, well, what's the problem? Just tell me. I don't know. No big deal. No, don't worry about anything. And then she tells me, I said, oh, well, let me go up on the roof and see what's going on, and I'll let you know. I'll tell you, it's probably somebody flew a kite into the broke a window, I don't know, something stupid. And I walked up, and then, I saw that this was not what I was not going to be able to, I did not have anything good to report back for what I just saw up on the roof, you know what I mean? And now I was in a situation where I basically had walked into the screen of a movie. It's like you're walking, like there's a Rodney Dangerfield joke where he says, will you go to a movie, you talk back to the screen, what's the matter for you, So it's like I walked into the screen. I actually did walk into the screen. So I'm like, wow, this is absolutely insane. And that was only one building, was an issue. But then all of a sudden, boom, I'm like, wow, this happened to the other building. Like, what is going on here? So throughout the day, words were coming into my head and kind of swirling around. And I figured, let me just write those 5 words down on a piece of paper. And I was just writing down words every now and then when they were going around, so that I could free my mind up to think other thoughts. And at the end of the day, all I had was a piece of paper with a bunch of words on it. So I decided to call those words Jazz for Peace. And then, I thought, there must be something. Since I saw this event and wrote these words, maybe these words have a life. Maybe there's something. Maybe the words I wrote have legs. Maybe this poem called Jazz for Peace, what would I do next? But I had no idea what to do next, so I just let it sit there. But then when the country opened up again, which was about 2 weeks later, I immediately had to get on a plane. Literally got news the country was open and immediately went to the airport to catch a plane to Savannah, Georgia. And now I'm in front of 8,500 people as the headliner at a jazz festival, with these words that nobody knows about. So in the middle of my show, I recited the words. And, that was like whoosh, like that set off a lot, because I had recited words. I was a headliner at that festival, which is, not easy. That's not every day either. So that was a rare opportunity too. And, like I said, 8,500 people heard about. I was the opposite of Mozart on that day, or let's say an Edgar Allan Poe. You know what I mean? I actually felt sorry for all the great poets of our time on that day because I'm sitting there with one poem and with an audience of 8,500
Did you provide
people.
context to the audience about where the words came from?
Well, yeah, I just said that I'd like to read to you a poem that I wrote watching the events of 9/11.
Yeah.
And everyone was caught off guard. The musicians didn't know either that I was on the stage with. So it was very emotional for everybody. And it was their first like activity since 9/11, because the whole country had been shut down.
Yeah. Rick, at this point, do you want to play the piece?
Yeah, I could do that. So basically, what I'll do is there's a traditional song. In the poem, I talk about how I'm, drawing from the traditions of jazz, from those who came before. You'll hear those words in the poem. So I'm going to start out with those who came before, and this is a great jazz pianist named Horace Silver, who was actually the pianist in the Art Blakey ensemble that did a live show at Birdland way back in the day that it was called Live at Birdland, and it's a very seminal record, influenced a lot of people, and some of his compositions were on that. And by the way, just to get to the 6 degrees of separation again, I actually played. Art Blakey was too old by the time I got to New York for me to play with him, but I played with his daughter. So this guy was a piano player in Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, and I became the piano player in Evelyn Blakey and the Jazz Passengers.
That's awesome.
That was his daughter's band. So this is a song, though, that he wrote called Peace. So I'm going to take from, like I said, kind of take the mantle from this and into my own thing that I'm going to make up. I don't know I'm going to make it. I don't know what it's going to be because I'm just going to make it up right now on the spot. And
okay.
That is I'm going to recite the words over that, and that'll be a unique musical performance only for this show.
Floor is yours, my friend.
There's a place that I know where the sycamores grow and daffodils have their fun, where the cares of the day seem to slowly fade away in the glow of the evening sun. Peace when the day is done. If I go there real late, let my mind meditate on everything to be done. If I search deep inside, let my conscience be my guide, then the answers are sure to come. Don't have to worry none. Peace when the day is done. I hear jazz for peace. Coming through the trees. My heart, it fills me like a celebration. I see the light, and I want to follow. Contributions of those that came before. And lay the groundwork for us to build on in this universal language that is a gift for all mankind. By the creativity and artistry that stands for peace and love. An intelligence that leads to reaching potential that we have in our soul. So we can raise our total conscience and see that the gift of giving is our greatest privilege. I hear jazz for peace.
Oof. Rick, that was amazing. Speechless. Really speechless. It's incredible. I mean, just talking more about music and consciousness myself, I don't know if it's my age, having a deeper appreciation, like I mentioned, just that random song that played in my earbuds that day with outside on the lawn. But there's certain notes that you hit, man, and that rush just goes. I felt it in the back of my brain. Wow. I felt it in the back of my brain, and it just went down my back, just certain chords. It was just beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much for that.
Thanks. I mean, you played a part. I mean, you know, when you improvise like this, everything plays a part in it. Whatever's going on in the world, the moment in time, the space in time, our energy connection, every what we were talking about, every little thing had something to do with it, and I could never do it again. That's all I can tell you. I would never be able
beautiful.
to do it again. Thanks.
That was incredible, incredible. So, Rick, does it make sense from your childhood that this is what you're doing, that this is what you're doing today? Not that you knew this is where you were going to end up, but how do you reconcile who you were as a kid to what the work you're doing now whether it's the music and or just the global outreach, the global advocacy for peace that you're doing? How do you reconcile childhood to now?
Ultimately, if you really want to get down to it, what I was doing when I first went up to that piano and I said, I want to figure out what is going on with this thing, this sound that's in, is ultimately what I am doing here for you, except with all of the training, with all of the knowledge, with all of the experience, with all of the expertise. That's the only difference. So I'm really doing something very similar for you than what I was doing all by myself on that very first day when I was like, is anybody around? I want to make sure nobody could hear me. I was just me and this piano, and I'm going to figure this thing out. Santa brought this in. I'm going to figure this out just by myself. I'm going to figure this whole thing out. So it really, there's a connection from that moment to this moment. Now, how it manifests itself, I don't know. You have to, that's where maybe a higher power comes in. But that's what I've been talking about in other podcasts, because there's so much tragedy in the world and in the arts especially. I remember when I brought up Zion, Utah, because I was in Utah anyway. I'd been on this guy's podcast, and just before I left to go to Utah, because I'm an avid skier, and he said, "You're going to Utah? I'm in Zion. You got to come down. No, you got to come down. We got to do something live." So live, we were talking about bands that these tragic situations. You mentioned Billy Joel, but there's another one called Badfinger that had a record out. They were signed by the Beatles. And it's a crazy thing because they had 3 hits on that record. And then a 4th song was an even bigger than all their other 3 hits that was recorded by this guy, Harry Nilsson, and that they had written, but they didn't do a very good job on themselves. And this guy took it and did a great... But 2 of them, the band was finished. By the time, these accolades came in, the band was finished, and 2 of the guys had killed themselves. So, in other words, like, who the heck knows? You've got to hang in there, play your best game of life every day, and who the heck knows how it's all going to play out. Like I said, this is a beautiful day today because we're sitting here enjoying this time together, but I could have been a tragedy like those people and not been around to see it. Like if those guys had just stayed around on this earth and hung in there and played a good game, who knows where they, surely they would have been in a situation where that music came back, because all those old bands ended up touring again. Three Dog Night, they ended up being able to, make, get a decent living and, I don't know, figure stuff out. But like I said, sometimes you don't make it all the way that far. Stuff happens. Unfortunately, Mozart would have had to live like 300 years, but what are you going to do?
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, there is a silver lining somewhere. You just hope it'll be while you're around to see it.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Very good point. Rick, what do you consider, a few more questions before we dive into the book, what do you consider your superpower?
I probably would think it is my ability to connect to what probably has to be considered a higher power. It's definitely a higher energy than the norm. I'm willing to say, hey, wait a minute. Just little old me, I can't do this musically. What I did for you, I can't do. So I have to connect to something greater than me to do something that hopefully you enjoyed the way you said you did. But to do that, I had to connect. So in other words, I'm getting some help from somewhere, but I have to tap into it. So that might be my superpower, that I can tap into that higher energy, higher emotion, that higher being, the supernatural itself. Because like I said, the music's coming through me. There could be a higher power involved here that I'm tapping into. And you hear about these from other people when they say they tap into the Akashic records, or they tap, they're empaths. I don't know. There's something there's stuff out there that's bigger than us, and why not use it to our benefit?
So what do you say, and this isn't a question I usually ask, but obviously it comes from our conversation, what you just said. Mm-hmm. So what do you say to somebody, growing in acceptance and appreciation and acknowledgement of this consciousness of living, of work, of humanity, whatever it may be. Now we're talking about your tapping into that music, musicians tapping into that. What do you say to somebody who doesn't feel they have anything creative to tap into, that they're not drawn to or play instruments, that they don't paint, that they don't write any kind of artistry? Never thought I'd ask this question, but what do you say to somebody that doesn't believe or think that they have access to something that could channel that?
I would tell anybody that the chance, that the possibility that you yourself are in every bit as important as every other species on this planet, the chances that you are not equally as important is zero. Absolutely zero. Completely zero. Because each person has their own unique thing that they can do, that they are. And a lot of people, I see people all the time that don't see it. They don't see how special they were. They don't see, they did something that I look at like, I could never do that, what you just did. I could never do it. But I can't reach them for them to understand that they need to, so I would tell them, you're just not seeing it. It's not that it's not there. It's there. You're just not seeing it. I mean, you can, like for me to do anything, I need to collaborate with somebody on something. And so, if you want to play music somewhere, someone's got to be in the audience. You know what I mean? So a person, there is a point of participation at every level. There is a point of participation in that which can bring us a better way forward. There's a point of participation, and everybody has a point of participation now and other points in the future. So I would tell the person he's just not seeing it, not that it's not there.
Yeah. Rick, as a leadership coach, I'm curious, and you can bring leadership into any conversation, glean insights for leadership from any kind of conversation, even if it has to do with music, whatever it may be. How do you define leadership? What does it mean to you?
Well, I think it's a good idea to study other leaders. And when you do study them, an interesting thing about some of them is their ability to, not be quite as rigid. In other words, for me to become a leader, I remember having, let's say when I played with great musicians who had bigger careers than me because they were older than me. There was a. If you look at rickdellarata.com, you'll see all these really well-known musicians. If you Google them or look up their bio, they played with Miles Davis and they played with this one and that one and all these big names. Chick Corea, this one, that one, and they were in my band playing with me, but they were bigger than me. Sometimes I get off a plane somewhere and people would flock to them because they had played in that. They had played in London dozens of times, and I was just showing up to London for my first time, for example. So what would I do? Well, they would tell me, hey, we're going to give you the advice, but ultimately you have to decide whether to use it or not, what to keep, what to not keep, what to put in, what to put out. Ultimately, you have to do it. So I think leadership is a willingness to let the cream rise to the top. So let the best thing, you know what I mean? Not stifle the progress. Yeah.
Yes. Lovely. All right, Rick. Now jumping to the book. Why don't you introduce the book with the full title, subtitle, and tell me a little bit about how the book came to be, if you could.
Right. So the book is called Paving the Path for Peace Through Music. The subtitle is The Amazing Story of Rick DellaRatta and Jazz for Peace, and the author is Deborah R. Saratelli, who, like I said, had written a volunteer Jazz for Peace, who had written an article that was published by allaboutjazz.com, and I think if you ever either Google the title of the article, you go to allaboutjazz.com and you could see it, but I think if you even Google Jazz for Peace, A Convenient Truth. And she was someone who had proven that she could write a great article, but probably didn't want to, the burden of of writing a whole book. I doubt she ever even considered writing a book. But knowing that she had written that article, knowing that it was successful, and knowing that I had another friend who was telling me, hey, you should write a book, and he just, wouldn't back down. You know what I mean? He wasn't he wasn't getting me upset or nothing, but he was like, testing me. You know how something like, if you think something's a good idea, you push it a little bit on the person, against.
Yeah.
So I was trying to push back, but I knew he was right, but I didn't want to take on. It just seemed so enormous to write a book. It just seemed so overwhelming. But he's telling me about the Chat GPT, and you can look up stuff, and it'll gather information, and then you can parse through the information. It could make it so much easier. He's telling me, right? So I conveyed that to her because she brought up that she had the Genie app. I said, you could write a book with that, blah, blah, blah. And somehow one thing led to another, and she started asking questions that she wanted information on me, and asking it questions and getting information from it that it would glean from, all of the articles that were written about me and stuff like that. It would find, glean information. So she wrote the book. She asked me to write the foreword, which I did. I told you about Mozart.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my opportunity to really say something about, Mozart and at the very end of that, I say, basically, in terms of both people, so it's Mozart and the other musician the no-name musician, who just took the instrument, had a pure connection with the universe and with himself and his instrument. Both of their lives and efforts are a much greater. Both of these existences are honorable. That's what I said. So Mozart and the other guy, both of these existences are honorable. Both made great contributions to others. So most of them made great contributions to other people, as well as their community, society, and are great examples for the world at large. Both of their lives and efforts are a much greater alternative choice than the path of war, discrimination, hatred, and annihilation. The fact of the matter is, and then I repeated my famous quote, which again, I have a famous quote if you ever Google Rick DellaRatta famous quote, and it comes from the very first article ever written about Jazz for Peace. Was a preview to, it was after I recited the poem, and it was a preview to my next concert. And so I said, the fact of the matter is, when we fill our souls up with creativity, artistry, and intelligence, and numerous other things of that nature, we have a better chance at avoiding the behavior that leads to destruction. And this is the story of my life through music, which inevitably became the story of Jazz for Peace. Now, this book basically is chapters that start out with where you started out. Santa was here is the very first chapter. So it starts out exactly what you did.
Yep.
And it basically just goes through different sorts of, areas of my journey.
Can you read some of the chapter titles just to kind of give us a sense of that, the breakdown of the journey, your path, what it might cover,
so
or what it does cover?
Yeah, so the very first chapter is Santa Was Here. So that tells the story that I told you about the Santa Claus situation, how I started playing the piano. The second one goes into my formal training at the New England Conservatory, and it's called Master Journey. And that talks about my training and numerous mentors. Jackie Byrd was a great mentor of mine. I'm not sure if his name is mentioned in here. I think it is. So Jackie Byrd, William Thomas McKinley, those two names, a classical teacher named Thomas Stump, mentions these mentors that were at that school in Boston. Then the next one is on Dizzy Gillespie, because I did get my very first break in music as the opening act and MC for Dizzy Gillespie, which was a phenomenal opportunity. So that chapter is about him. Then I told you I ended up in the big city because of my friend Otis, one of two Otises who...
I was going to say, which Otis was it?
Yeah, which Otis? The Otis number one, I guess we'll have to call him. So
the second Otis, his real name was Otis?
The second one's real name was Otis, and he had a rent control apartment in the same building. I was a roommate, but now he was like, "Hey, I need you. If you want, you can stay in my rent control. That's a 2-bedroom," because he didn't want to. It was a crazy thing. he had a house with a wife and kids out in Jersey, and he didn't want to lose the apartment. But by renting it out, he could lose it because, people would see, strangers. I had been in the building, so people see me coming out of the building. They knew I lived, you know what I mean? So I wasn't going to cause any riffraff. I could keep an eye on his place.
Yeah, it was a win-win situation.
Win-win, huge for everybody, yeah. Until the building got sold, and then those people hired private detectives to get...
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's how... And then that's when the other Otis came in. The other Otis called me and said, "Rick, I know you got to." He said, "Rick, you got to get out of here." I said, "Yeah, I have to get out of this place. What do you got going?" I got this place because he was getting married to his white girlfriend. My other Otis only dated white women, and he had a white girlfriend. They were going to get married and have kids.
My other Otis, yeah.
Yeah. So now, time for the big city. This was New York City. It talks about that. The next one is Permutata, which is the London Symphony.
Okay.
And the next one is a melodic response to tragedy. And this is I told you I was playing with very famous people. These two guys I had a trio with these two guys. One of them was the drummer on Bitches Brew for Miles Davis. And the other one was the bass player for Bill Evans, who's one of the most seminal jazz pianists in jazz history. And that was his bass player. So I had the most, probably the greatest pianist's bass player, and probably the greatest jazz artist's drummer.
Yeah.
And that was my trio at 9/11. So, but anyway, it was a melodic response to tragedy. Then it goes from there to, there's the Jazz Piece poem in there, the melodic response to tragedy, the poem is in it. Then it goes to the United Nations, and that's the band with Israeli, Palestinian, and American musicians. And like I said, Jazz for Peace has a proposal to solve that conflict. But here's the problem. Our society doesn't look to the arts and culture, and they don't conceive that somebody in front of a piano could solve the greatest world's problem. Unfortunately, because they don't conceive it, they won't look at my proposal. Because I would call somebody up like me and say, "Hey, man, I need some help. We got to solve this thing. What do you got?" They do the opposite. They like musician out of a musician because in their mindset. But that's not the way it's been in society. In society, musicians have been solving problems like this for centuries. But see, our mindset, this capitalist mindset, we don't put musicians there. We think of them only as entertainers, beer salesmen. That's what we think. So anyway, I'm just hoping that someone will consider some of my because I have lots of them now to address a lot of problems, and I'd like to see if they could be tried out to see if they could solve our problems. But anyway, now it gets into my music, rhythm and harmony. This is Brazilian music is a big part of my world, and this is a CD called Live in Brazil and the Blue Note. And here's what happened with this. I was playing at a club in New York called the Blue Note, and I was playing there.
I've been there.
Well, I was
down in the village.
Down in the village, I was a house band. I was the house band pianist in that band. So I used to play there at 1:00 in the morning, from like 12:30 at night until 4:30. So that's when I told you 9 to 5 for me. I would get home at 5 in the morning from the Blue Note.
Yeah.
I was every day I would play there, and I could go in, because they had a big name playing before us.
Yep.
And then they would open up for a jam session, and I was the house band pianist. So I would come up early and say, heck, because if there was somebody I liked that was playing in there, I'd pretend I left a drumstick, and you let me know, and bounce, the doorman. Finally, they just like, "Hey, look, I don't want to hear your story. Just go in and check the guy out."
Yeah.
So that's rhythm and harmony. So what happened was the Blue Note, when my first CD came out, the Blue Note gave me a gig at their club, and it was part of the Panasonic Jazz Festival. It was packed, and there was a line going around the block and everything. It was a great gig, and it was recorded. So I had talked to the Blue Note, and I said, "Listen, my first CD had already come out. Now my second CD had those big names that I was showing you. But the third CD, I said, hey, that recording I did at the Blue Note, could I call my CD Live at the Blue Note?" I didn't know what I was going to say, but they said yes. So I said, okay, Live at the Blue Note, but then I ended up in Brazil. And the Brazil promoter said, "Your next CD live in Brazil," and he gives me the tapes. So I had to put a 2 CD set, and I had to call it Live in Brazil and the Blue Note. That's what that says.
Wow.
Live
Okay.
in Brazil and the Blue
Okay.
Note. It was a double CD set. One CD was recorded in New York at the Blue Note live, and the other one was recorded in Fortaleza, Brazil, where this guy came and painted me and my trio from the first CD. Because I got this gig in Brazil from the very first CD that I recorded that was at the
So
Blue Note.
is that your main connection to Brazil? When you say I forgot the wording, I apologize. When you had kind of a connection or a deep connection or an affinity to Brazil, was it that particular?
Actually, no. And that's what this talks about. This is called Rhythm and Harmony, and it talks about my relationship with the country of Brazil. And actually, this right here, this is a bass player who used to play with Elis Regina, who was the Billie Holiday of Brazil. And what happened was I was playing in Japan, and I was playing at this place in Japan. There was no people there, and I was like, they are going to fire me any minute. I mean, I'm just waiting for a notification that says, Rick, I'm really sorry, this ain't working out here, and we're just going to have to send you back. And I was just waiting for that. And one day I get this big thumbs up from this. Everybody had a award in this place. It was down in a basement. And everybody had an award in this. The bartender had some kind of award. The bottles of whiskey had awards on them. And when a guy came in, there was like 9 workers to greet the guy. And then the guy was followed by women in kimonos. It was a wild setup. But there was like hardly ever anybody in the place. I said, what's that for? He said, good job. I said, good job. There was nobody in this place. He said, but you don't understand how much they spend. So then I was like, what's going on around here? So the next thing that happens was there's another guy, because I saw workers, I didn't see customers. You know what I mean? And I'm like, they're going to send me home or something. I don't want to be sent home because I want to visit Japan. I want to get paid, but there's no people in this joint I'm playing. This other guy, Mr. Leek called me. Mr. Leek, today we try something different. I was like, okay, try like what, sending me home? No, today you sit, you play, then sit, talk with customer. So now I'm sitting talking with one of these few customers, right? And they can't talk. They're trying to talk to me, and I'm trying to talk to them. Well, they can't speak English well enough, and I can't speak Japanese well enough. But, I'm doing what the guy wants me to do, playing a little and talking a little. And one of the guys starts laughing, and I said, what's so funny? And I didn't tell a joke, but he's laughing. And he's looking at me and laughing. I said, is something funny? What's so funny? He said, you American people, ha, ha, ha. I said, what's so funny about American people? And he said, think Donald Trump rich. Think Donald Trump rich.
Yeah.
So I'm funny because I think Donald Trump is rich. Mm-hmm. So I go up to the manager and I said, who is that guy that you just had me sit with? Oh, he's big. He big, Mr. Kochi. I said, Mitsukoshi? I mean, I like those 9 floor grocery stores that are 9 floors, like 8 or 9 floors, and then the below it, you go below because you can literally, they have so many samples that you'll be full after you go through and all the samples of seaweed and fish and try this sample, that sample. And it's 8 floor, the massive grocery store. Yes, that's him. He owns all the grocery stores.
Wow.
So now I realize, and it's $100 cover charge to get in. So in other words, it's like, they're trying to keep people out of there and not get people in there.
Mm-hmm.
So I was playing in a place where they were trying to keep people away from.
Yeah. That exclusivity of experience.
It was total exclusive. Yeah, total exclusiveness. They would do crazy things in there, like they would say, we're going to go get some sushi. You want some sushi? I'd say, yeah, where are you going to get the sushi from? Kyoto. I said, Kyoto. That's like all the way across the country. Yeah, we're sending someone there on the bullet train.
Oh, my God.
And I said, why? That has to be this. We have the special place. And the fish had been buried for 7 years under the ground. They would say, like, this mackerel has been buried for 7 years. He's going to dig it up now, and they're going to cut it, slice it, put on the guys that come on the train and bring it to us.
That's incredible.
Yeah, all kinds of crazy stuff. So anyway, I'm playing there, and a Brazilian bass player found out I was playing in there, and he knew I really wanted to play jazz with other musicians because I was there just solo. And we start talking, and he's like, Ricky, what time you finish there? I said, I finish at like 10:30. He said, well, listen, I'll pick you up. I'll take you to a jazz club. He starts taking me to Japanese jazz clubs every night now. Every night. And it's crazy because, he lives there, and he has a Japanese wife. He's a Brazilian bass player. And he's got the whole setup, you know. He's got gigs all the time. He's got the Japanese wife. He's living the life. He's into the great food, everything. And he knows the scene. And these clubs are like, they act like he must have been like talking to them, hey, I'm going to bring this guy. You're going to love him, blah, blah. So that brings me different club every night. And I go in and play with the Japanese musicians. Two of us would go up and they'd open a big party. The food would, everything. And then I'd go out with him and the musicians after that to one of those little things, like small little places where there'd be one chef making this stuff and it would come out.
Yeah. And there's like 2 or 3 stools, like that's it.
Yes, that's it. So I'd go out with him and a couple of musicians and we go out. And then he'd bring me back and he'd pick me up 2 nights later to go to another one, you know? And so he was doing that, all that. And so I finally do get to the end of my contract and he says, so what's going on? I said, well, when are you going back? I got to go back like tomorrow or the next day. I'm like, tomorrow's my last night. I'm going back the next day. You know, I'll miss you. I really appreciate it. He says, listen, when you go back, you're going to get a phone call from my friend. He plays percussion. I said, you have a friend, Brazilian friend, plays percussion. Yes, he's going to call you. I said, okay. He says, his name is Guilherme Franco. And I said, Guilherme Franco. I said, well, there must be a lot of percussionists named Guilherme Franco in Brazil.
Yeah.
And he
said, because it can't
no.
be that one.
Right. And he said, what are you talking about? I said, because I know a percussionist named Guilherme Franco, but that guy played with Keith Jarrett. He played with McCoy Tyner. He played with, all these, and I started rattling off all these big names he played with. Plus, I said, I interviewed him when I was in high school because I tried to interview McCoy Tyner, and McCoy Tyner wouldn't come off the stage, and I interviewed him instead because I was writing an article on jazz, and I interviewed a guy named Guilherme Franco. He said, that's him, and he's going to call you.
That's awesome.
So I get back
amazing.
to New York, and I'm like, yeah, this guy's... All right, we'll see what happens. Phone rings. Ricky, this is Guilherme Franco. I want to tell you that man you were playing with and is my trusted friend. I trust everything he says. He starts telling me all this stuff. He trusts him like crazy. I'm like, oh my God, this is crazy. Where are you now? I'm at my apartment. He comes over, spend the whole day together talking, and then he gets ready to leave. And now we're outside in front of my place. Now, this is in Central Park West, like I told you, where the Otis gave me, the apartment.
Otis.
Otis number 2. I'm in that place now, Otis number 2, and he's in there with me, and we go back out. And just before he gets in his car, he says, so Ricky, what are you doing tomorrow night? I said, well, I have no schedule at all. I just got back from Japan. I have nothing to do. So, we're at a concert in Philadelphia. That's where you meet. This is the directions. Meet down there at such and such time. The car will be... And I was just thrown into the Brazilian jazz scene. Because he had the best band in the world. Best Brazilian band in the world. You know what I mean? Like 14 percussionists. It was insane, So I'm in this Brazilian band. Well, I got bigger as a Brazilian jazz artist than an American jazz artist. So people come up to me and speak Portuguese. I was really a Brazilian jazz artist in New York. I was known as a Brazilian jazz because I was the only one. Everybody else was all from Brazil, and they were from different bands, like all the big Brazilian bands, like I don't know, this band, that band, and this well-known band and that well-known band, and they would come just intertrain. And I was this regular guy with these different guys coming and going, so I knew all these people. And like I said, in New York, I was a Brazilian jazz musician. Then I got to be an American jazz musician when someone called me from Brazil. So I get a call from Brazil, a promoter, and he says, I've been checking you out, and you sing like Chet Baker, and you play like Bill Evans, he said. Bill Evans, who I told you the bass player was with.
Yep.
You play like Bill Evans, and those are 2 of my favorite jazz musicians, and I want to bring you to Brazil. So guess what? I got to be an American jazz musician in Brazil because in New York I was a Brazilian jazz musician. So go figure. So anyway, that's what this chapter is about, because I was playing Brazilian music like these guys had me. They were like, they had meshed their Brazilian rhythms all the way through my rib cage into my soul. You know what I'm saying? So like American.
No, I don't. I need to check that out. I need to listen to that and what that sounds like. Okay.
Fale-me desse fim do nosso amor. perdoa, por favor. Eu sei que o erro aconteceu, mas não sei o de vez. Tudo muda de vez. E um dia vou querer, só sei que amei, que amei, que amei, que amei. Será talvez e minha ilusão botar o meu coração. Vou tudo pulsar pra essa moça me fazer feliz. E o destino não quis me ver como raiz de uma flor de lis. E foi assim que eu vi nosso amor a ruera. Monta na beleza fria de Maria. É o meu jardim da vida, esse é como eu. Tá que brotou Maria, nem Margarita nasceu. Meu jardim da vida, esse é como eu. Tá que brotou Maria, nem Margarita nasceu. Meu jardim da vida, ele é como eu. Tá que brotou Maria, nem Margarita nasceu. Meu jardim da vida, esse é como eu. Tá que brotou Maria, nem Margarita nasceu.
It's so funny now that the keyboard's not up, and I said that, I meant after this interview I'll go look it up, and then I forgot you had the keyboard in front of you. You jumped right into it. I love it. That energy. You're Portuguese.
Right. So the singers started teaching me how to sing in Portuguese, the various singers that would come through with the band. In fact, one of them called me from Brazil just a few days ago. I'm still in touch with some of them, But this one would teach me one song, another would teach me another song, and I ended up with, singing a number of songs in Portuguese. So when I came to Brazil, I don't even know if this guy knew, but I could sing. I sang some songs in Portuguese, and on that Live in Brazil CD, Live in Brazil.
Incredible.
And the Blue Note. So that's that. This talks about, and I brought Jazz Pianists to Brazil too. So that talks about my affiliation with Brazilian music, which is far and above the normal jazz musician. Like I said, I would play with American jazz musicians, and they'd be like, "What the hell are you doing?" I said, "Well." So I said, "Who you been playing?" "I've been playing with this band, Peggy Boy." And they're like, "Wow, man, you're one of them."
Yeah. I mean, you get so ingrained in the culture, you're surrounded by it. It'll be interesting. I'm going to take a listen and try to find it, because I'm trying to picture that with all the Brazilian percussion around you accompanying that piece.
Yeah. I mean, if you could hear them, if you could hear 15 people doing this, and better than what you heard, in other words, I was just fitting in with them. They were at the highest level of all, and you just, it was like carnival,
And there's no doubt in my mind you can't pull off the transition, but what was that like if you were doing these gigs, you were maybe down there for a while playing that rhythm, right? That Brazilian rhythm, and then you had to switch to something else. Obviously, you're a professional. You've been doing this long enough. You could pull it off, but what was that transition like for you doing the Brazilian jazz and then moving to a different cadence in something more traditional?
Well, basically, I mean, you'd feel the ability, like we were playing with Brazilian musicians, you'd feel how natural those rhythms are to them. So you'd fit in to their, you know what I mean? And when you switch to the jazz musicians, what I hoped was that I wasn't doing the opposite. If I was playing Brazilian music with musicians with the jazz musicians, now I'm carrying the ship, because I'm like trying to carry the thing forward. But if I'm switching and playing jazz, as long as I'm playing jazz with the jazz musicians, it's no problem, because I'm blending in with their expertise. And as long as I'm playing Brazilian music with the Brazilian musicians, Now nowadays, you have, and there were, even back then, every now and then I'd be able to find musicians that can play both, and there were. But now there hopefully are more that can, switch back and forth like that. But like I said, usually when I was playing with Brazilian musicians, it was Brazilian music, so I was basically, being carried by their, natural. And then the jazz thing, I was, in other words, they would pull me right into line with their natural, feel. So now the next one is music in the schools, because I started bringing music in the schools, doing educational programs with Jazz for Peace. So I did, one at, for example, I did one for 1,000 kids at Jerry Seinfeld's elementary school out in Massapequa. And they just bust in the kids from all the different schools, and I just stayed in that auditorium, and they filled it up with 1,000 kids, and then got the kids out and filled it up with and all the schools in the area came, and we did it. It was just a phenomenal thing. And like I said, these are things that, like, again, I mean, they were pulling me up at a high level and making me feel like, why do so many schools not have a day like this where I can come into their school and do that? They all should be doing it. You see what I mean? And it's kind of tragic that they're not. But, they don't, they're not able to, they'd have to change their perception on the arts and culture in order to, and it's really sad. So next comes Ski Bums for Peace, because what happened was I had always skied all my life, and I started playing at the ski resorts in Colorado, and basically I was on an island once I was in an island called Martinique, and I was playing at a Club Med with a bass player who loved my music and wanted to put a band together around me and play my music for these people in Club Med, and they were going to give us a free vacation at Club Med, and all we had to do was just play like every night a different concert or a different show.
Win-win.
Yeah, huge win-win. And the head of the whole village, he loved my music and all that. So I was walking on the beach with him, and I just happened to say, hey, it's really a shame. I'm just kidding around. I said, it's a shame that you don't have one at a ski area, because I love skiing. And I was always trying to figure out a way to keep skiing against the odds,
Yeah.
And he was like, we do. I said, yeah, but they're in Europe. He says, no, we have one in the United States. I said, okay, but it's probably some like little hill, right? Or said, no, I think it's a pretty good place. And he kept going like, no, I don't think you're getting it. We do, we have. And I'm like, are you serious? He said, I'll send you a trail map. You look at it. You ski, right? I said, yeah, I ski. I'll know. I'll send you. So there's the next morning there's a knock, some girl works for the club. Here, the chef de village wants you to have this. I said, I opened it up. It's an incredible mountain. It's called Copper Mountain in Colorado. It's a phenomenal ski area. They send me out there to play. And they had a special place where people made reservations. It was a very special, like, upscale type of thing for, it was an option if they took advantage of it, but it was reservation only. Yeah. And so it was a special type of dinner, special type of thing. So I would play for that every night, for an hour for their little thing. And basically I was trying to keep it going, and I ended up in Utah, skiing in the mountains of Utah, just phenomenal. And I've been doing it ever since. And as a joke, it's because I had Jazz for Peace, I started Ski Bums for Peace. Anyway, this talks about my love of skiing, and skiing is an amazing thing if you know what it is, and very few people know what it is, really. But if you ski at this mountain, and what was amazing about
when you say that, Rick, though, what do you mean if you know what it is? Like, people have the basic idea,
right.
Ski poles, skis coming down, but when you say if they know what it is, what do you mean? Well,
for example, what I do there is I'm a ski bum. So a lot of people think, oh, it's for rich people, and you rent this, spend a lot of money, and you blah, 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 and you have these big dinners, and you have the après ski, and you do this and that. No. I would try to find a place in someone's house that has an extra room that's close to a ski bus. And I try to do that if I can pull it off, and then I go either ride a bike to the ski bus or walk to the ski bus early in the morning at like 5 in the morning. I get the first bus at like 6 in the morning. I take a ski bus to the mountain, back and forth, comes with my ski ticket, and I'm basically on first tram. And I'm skiing on a mountain that has some of the best terrain in North America. Some people say the whole world, and it's called Snowbird. And it has some of the best snow, and it has some of the most snowfall. So I'm skiing sometimes in powder over my head Just this amazing epic experiences on skis. So it's really impossible it's so different from the average ski experience, is my point.
Perfect.
And that's a picture of me skiing that someone took. So, so now we got into other things that I was doing. This chapter is called Free JA, and what I did was I took the 2 Z's off of the spelling of jazz, so I had no Z's. I found out in doing a concert in Haiti that jazz is spelled JASS. It's a Creole word. It's Creole. Okay. It's spelled JASS. So I took the S's off because nobody knows that. I took the Z's off because and I had Free Julian Assange. And I did over 200 performances to try to tell people that if you put journalists in jail, civilian casualties will escalate beyond your wildest dreams. And I got up on stage in Abuja, Nigeria, and I told people, and it was filmed. And then people started calling me and said, everything you said came true. And I said, well, I don't know what to tell you. I told you, because now we've had just the civilian casualties that are gone on in the last 3 years are beyond anything we ever imagined in our lifetimes.
Yeah.
And again, they finally did do that. But again, you're putting yourself at risk when you try to stand for what's right. I mean, right across the street from me is the New York Times, and they weren't coming on board. And I was, I don't like to call out the New York Times. That's not what I want to do when I wake up in the morning. You know what I mean? But I had to. Eventually, they did join forces with me and others that were trying to get this straightened out. And eventually, it did get straightened out. This is a concert I did for Stella Assange, who is the wife of Julian Assange. Okay. So that's on that. This one is on Rwanda, Africa, and this is one of the things that, again, the power of music and the mission of Jazz for Peace is beyond anything I could have ever imagined. We were called to Rwanda, Africa, because they were trying to overcome the horrors of a genocide that took place 14 years earlier, and their country, nobody wanted anything to do with their country. Nobody wanted to visit their country. Nobody wanted nothing to do with Rwanda since that genocide, and they wanted to show the world that they have recovered and they are not what we think they are, and they wanted to show the world what they really are today. And so Jazz for Peace came down and did a concert in a stadium for the regular people of Rwanda. Then we did another concert in a kind of a suit, a black tie affair type of thing for the dignitaries. And they also had something called the World Peace Marathon, and they had called Peace Week. Peace Week, which is Kamaharu. It's back here is posters all over here, but that's from Rwanda. And basically, there's a testimonial in here so what happened there was crazy. I mean, there's not enough time in the world, as you know, for all this stuff, but I'll just try to tell you this. I was in Africa, and people were showing up to the gig, to the concert, as we were playing, more and more people were coming. In fact, after we finished, even more people came, and I had jet lag, and someone gave me a giant beer with an elephant on it, and I drank it, and then I fell asleep backstage. And when I woke up, the whole place was packed. I mean, there was a zillion people, and there was an African band on stage playing, and I'm trying to get off the stage, and I can't get off the stage without everybody seeing me. So I try to sneak around the corner, and I'm trying, and all the people are seeing me and pointing to me, and the musicians are looking at me, and everyone's looking at me, and I'm like, what am I going to do? So I pretended that I was maybe going to do something with the band. So I walk over, people are screaming and yelling, and the keyboard player was like, and I'm like, I'll play with you. I don't know what I'm going to do. So I started jamming with the band by looking at the keyboard player's hands. So I didn't know what song they were playing. They were playing an African song. Yeah, this is live on stage. And like I said, it's packed and there's a zillion people there. And I just looked at his hand and I'm like, I don't know what song that is, but I know that is an E minor that he's playing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so I know I can do this over that, and it'll, who the hell knows?
I love that.
So, yeah,
I love
so
that.
these people started hearing things that they never heard. I was hearing things that I never heard because I didn't know the song, but they were hearing my interpretation of a song that they never heard, and everybody was going wacky. And so the next day, we got something. They sent it to New York. They said, they sent it to the author of this book. They sent it to our volunteer. Hi, the shows were great, and the people who were there had a super time. All the music was great. And Jazz for Peace did a jam session with the local band Holy Jadoves. The groups decided to jam impromptu, and everyone loved it. It showed the cultures coming together, being harmonious and uniting, which everyone enjoyed. So now the second place we played, they couldn't get in. The people were waiting outside trying to get in the second place. And the second night for the VIP dinner, the room was booked solid. The hotel had to set up extra tables as people waited. So that, again, was really great, blah, blah, blah. So my point is, I turned a total accident into, In other words, they liked that more than they liked my show because a lot of them showed up late. Africa was totally different. People trying to do stuff, in Africa. They're not on the same time frame. If you say something starts at 2:00 or something, they just think they can, any time in the day is fine. It's you can show up anytime.
Yeah.
So then it was Kenya, Africa. There's a chapter on that because I went to Africa 9 times. So the next time was amazing. Pakistan. So these are chapters about places that I went.
Okay.
And then Nepal, I see, is in here. This is Chicago because when I made it to Chicago, I did get a letter from Barack Obama.
Oh,
when
nice.
I showed up to Chicago, yeah. And this is one of my trips to Africa. I was for a tribe. The tribe, all of the people in the tribe, last name started with an O. All of them started with an O. And they told me that that's the tribe that Barack Obama's father was a member of. Because his father was Kenyan. So I played for his father's indigenous tribe. And
That's
this
amazing.
is one of the tribal members. And he took a picture of me and put it on Facebook saying, the king of jazz. So in their eyes, I'm a big name because that's the way they think, in their eyes. They don't. So the most important lesson ever. So this is where I get into the things that Jazz for Peace does for Outstanding Cause, how we help expand their donor base, rejuvenate their supporters, obtain sponsors, new and prestigious supporters, greater publicity and awareness, and help them to be better funded. These are fundraising tips that are important. A secret I would like to share, the importance of value. So these are kinds of fundraising tips. Huge impact on jazz and beyond that people have said that I've had. This is the jazz singer you talked about in the very beginning. You talked about, I was in this book called The Jazz Singer. My unprecedented achievements in jazz. So this goes all the way through all of the things I've done in my career. And there are, I believe, 6 unprecedented achievements in jazz that are listed in this. And this is a golden opportunity to feature a musician during his lifetime. So this talks about what I was telling you about. It's kind of insane that we, again, don't know who Vincent van Gogh is during his lifetime, don't really know who Mozart is during his lifetime, Charlie Parker, blah, blah, blah. So this chapter is basically like, why don't you do something with me during my lifetime instead of waiting till after I'm dead to maybe celebrate me?
Yeah, no, I hear you.
And this is addressing the pandemic. So now we get into world issues, solving the world's greatest problems. And we don't have enough time, obviously, but if you want to know how we can solve the problem with technology taking jobs and things like that, we have solutions, and I think those solutions should be explored. A trickle-up economy for philanthropy. I mean, when I tell people these solutions, there's very little pushback. I mean, I'm waiting for it because I want to see if I'm not onto something. But according
where
to
the
them,
conversation can be had,
yeah. So this is the peace proposal for the Middle East. Okay, this is the peace proposal, and like I said, this was voted on by Israelis and Palestinians. This is where Israelis and Palestinians are on the same side when it comes to voting for the Jazz for Peace peace proposal, and the vote was calculated by LinkedIn, a separate entity. They calculated the votes, and we got 96%. 96% voted for what we did. Yeah, so, I don't get it, but that's in here, and it's a lot, because there's a lot. We want people to know that we do have a solution, and both the people of Israel and the people of Palestine like our solution. So there's a lot on that. And here is the vote. You can see it. This is 94%. I think when the whole thing was said and done, it was 96%. But you can see it in here, a page where you see that tallied. And this is JFP for Dummies. I don't know what this says, but this is kind of like helps people that want to fundraise, I believe. JFP for Dummies. And this is the Extraordinary Challenge. This is where we get into the future and what Jazz for Peace believes can make a better future for our world based on our achievements and what we've learned along the way. That takes us to the importance to not censor peace. So this is called the censorship of peace. It brings out issues and situations where peace was censored, and we make these, we show these areas, and we're trying to say to people, listen, don't censor peace. We need it. And this is Embracing the Future, is the very last chapter. And I believe that's the last one, Embracing the Future. And this is, for the very last pages, we have Jazz for Peace, proving once and for all the final solution is love. And that's the name of our podcast. The final solution is love.
Rick, I'm curious. Thank you for sharing all that and giving us a walkthrough. That was amazing. I'm curious, when you see that for the first time, you see the book put together and you're going through it and you're seeing what's collected. Obviously, you've lived it. Obviously, it expresses your values, your advocacy. How has that book being out, how has that changed you at all? How has it maybe evolved the way you think about the work that you do? Because there really is a lot to, we're going through life, we're living through life, we're in the moment, but there's a lot to seeing it written, whether you're journaling something yourself in one chapter of your life, or you're reading a book that's, dozens of chapters from all over the world, all over in terms of working with different people, different cultures. So what is it like for you? How does that hit you when you see the book together and you see all your work laid out in such a way?
You know what? It's a permanent ungaslighting. So in other words, it's a reference point to be ungaslit, because basically it seemed like I was going through life, like going out here, wow, this really is life, and then being brought back to being this gaslighting of this absurd thing, like, oh, he's a musician, he can't solve our problems, oh, blah, 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 oh, music isn't that important, oh, the arts aren't important, oh, this, oh, that, and then I stopped believing, because I'm around me, and it's like it's like a dystopia, and then I was noticing I'd be on a podcast after being, walking around in a dystopia, and then I'd be on a podcast, and the person would be saying, "Now we looked at tell us about this trip you took to Pakistan, where we saw pictures of you in a car with tinted windows, and you went in and out of these schools and helped the children and blah blah blah." And I'm like, "Wow, you know about that?" And like, yeah, like, wow, I was almost ready to not believe it myself, but since you guys believe it and it is true, let's talk about it. So my point is, it's a point of reference that you can't really claw back, because, this is where we have to get to. We have to get to a place where this reality that was my reality is our world. It has to be the norm and not the exception. That's what we have to do. This what you see in that book needs to be the norm, because we have the potential for it to be. But again, we are trapped at a lower human consciousness energy level. And all these people are saying the same things, just in different ways. But like that woman was saying it one way, the astrologer was saying it another way, and they're all saying it, but they're basically saying we're trapped at a lower level, maybe because, people make money at this level, so they need us to purchase things as subliminal messages or whatever. But, when that doctor was talking to that woman at a higher level of consciousness and getting her to stop clearing her throat every 3 seconds, now, you see that we all need to raise our consciousness at a higher level.
Absolutely.
This has to be the norm.
Rick, we've been here, obviously speaking about your book, but what other book, someone else's book, has inspired you or made an impact on you? Is there a book that stands out?
Yeah, there are. There's let me think of something. I have to say all the writings of Dostoevsky are quite phenomenal. You familiar with him? Dostoevsky?
No.
Oh, you should check him out. So Dostoevsky's crazy because I remember I was with a person and we were talking about, these billionaires today, right? Now, if you see a billionaire and they're telling you that he's solving all the world's problems, and you look out and you see a world full of problems, try to see if that billionaire has a page like jazzforpeace.wordpress.com/about. Go to that page and see if that billionaire has a page like that. Because if he doesn't, you're looking at what I did at zero. And if I did all that at zero, and he's got billions of dollars and he doesn't have a page like that, then you can't really say we're achieving at our highest potential. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
He's got billions of dollars, and he doesn't have a page anything close to what I was able to do at zero. So my point is, I was telling somebody that, man, this guy Dostoevsky, he accomplished more in a Siberian concentration camp than most people are concentrated. And then I caught myself because I knew this guy I was talking to, he would never understand that. He would never. But if you ever check out Dostoevsky and you read some of his books, one is called Crime and Punishment. Another one is called The Brothers Karamazov. And what I sometimes like to do is I like to just go to YouTube and just look at someone's synopsis of one of his books and the way they'll talk about it and all that stuff. But there are a lot. I just want to say, unfortunately, I picked one guy who has like 5 books at least that I would,
no
worries,
no
think
worries,
are
no
phenomenal.
concerns.
Yeah.
And then, Rick, in wrapping up, is there anything that you want to share about what you're up to these days? Anything that wasn't covered? Anything that I didn't ask? Anything at all? Any events? Anything you want to share? The floor is yours.
Well, I would like to, again, you brought up something interesting, and that is a person who doesn't know that he's making a contribution or doesn't think he can, And what I'm trying to do, one thing I am trying to do with the Jazz for Peace podcast is show how unique just about anybody can be. And I'm bringing a wide variety of guests on and showing how their contribution is unique, it's important, it's part of it, and trying to hopefully teach people that not only is the final solution is love, but that you have an important role to play in our progression from what I hope is 0% funding for world peace where we are now to 100% funding where we at some point need to be as a species.
This was amazing. Thank you for the walkthrough. Thank you for the pieces that you played. This was, I can't say enough. I'm kind of speechless about it, but thank you, Rick, for your time.
I appreciate it so much, John. Great opportunity.
And again, Rick shared his book, Paving the Path for Peace Through Music, the amazing story of Rick DellaRatta and Jazz for Peace. And if there's anything that I might have missed, we covered so much, and there's always more to learn, always more questions to ask in certain ways. But if there's anything that I didn't ask, anything you want to hear, let me know, and I'll reach out to Rick, see what kind of additional insights, guidance, knowledge, wisdom I can get. In the meantime, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.